Thank you so much for having me, Jared. Always a pleasure to be here.
Always great having you.
My name's Kelly. I work at our studio. I'm a solutions engineer there, and I'm not here to talk about the Tidyverse because that's not what I do. But I am here to talk about something that I've been on the road doing for the past year, which is talking to data scientists about DevOps. And I've been doing this sort of overtly and covertly, sneaking it into my presentations. And I wanted to spend this last conference of my year reflecting on what I've seen and heard and talked about and experienced along the way. So thank you for witnessing my reflections here. But first I want to talk about solutions engineering, because a lot of folks don't know what solutions engineering is. And I want to say right off the bat, it's not dev and it's not really ops. So why am I talking about DevOps? Well, at our studio, we, as you probably know, build a lot of open source, free and open source tools. But in order to fund all of that awesome software development, we also provide professional tooling. So we sell professional versions of our software to folks who are interested in having that sort of license and support from us. And my team, Solutions Engineering, that I'm part of, does a lot of work to try to understand what happens when we bring data science, the data science workflow, and drop it into these various industries and enterprise environments and try to solve for those types of problems that we see there. So I get to be a part of these really cool conversations and be an advocate for our customers inside of our studio to discuss, like, what are we seeing, what can we learn, what are the needs, and what are the problems that folks have when they try to bring R into their organizations. So I want to talk about what the problems are. And number one still for R, and now as we are embracing Python as well, Python is just getting legitimacy around the R programming language. So when folks try to bring R into their organizations, generally how that happens is they will download the free and open source tools because they've done that in grad school, and now they're going to do that inside their organization. And we call that bringing R in through the back door. It's a perfectly fine way to get started using R inside of your organization, but it can come with challenges, especially as you try to grow your adoption of R within your organization and help other folks learn the tool and get the resources from your organization in order to support that growth. So there are a lot of challenges here. For the past year, folks on my team have been doing a lot of writing about how to solve for some of these challenges when you're legitimizing R. But we still see a lot of pushback, especially from higher level folks in management and people from IT. This tweet, one of my friends from the community put out into the world sometime last January, really summarized it well for me. But we see these kinds of comments all the time, like, can anybody point me to some good resources for starting a conversation with the IT department about making R and Shiny an accepted part of our software kit? So we still see a lot of struggle with this, and that's the problem that I am really passionate about helping other people solve. Now, there are frameworks that developers have used now for many years to start conversations with IT. And those frameworks have largely been lumped under this topic or this style of communication that is called DevOps. And so I wanted to give a really super quick introduction to what DevOps is by starting with what DevOps isn't. Now these, if you have heard of DevOps or have any exposure to it, many folks will try to tell you that DevOps is just like collection of these crazy tools. You've heard things like CI/CD and programmatic deployment and serverless computing, and all of these tools, I've probably only heard of like maybe a quarter of them, half of them up there. There are tons of logos and companies who are interested in getting involved in this space, and they can be really fun to get into and tinker with. So many of my previous DCR and NYR talks have been about my experiences tinkering with these types of tooling and meshing them with R. that's not what I'm here to talk about today, because I want to take a step back and talk about what DevOps really is to me, and that is a philosophy. DevOps is this philosophy or set of practices that create new processes for collaboration between development and operations or IT teams. There is nothing new in DevOps. It came from, a framework around lean manufacturing that was largely written about in the 70s and 80s. And before that, it was just like a framework for making common sense decisions. So we are borrowing from these other industries, which is really great. It reminds me of kind of stoic philosophy that's been around for ages now. But it is excellent to think about these things and how maybe as data scientists we can adopt some of them into our own workflows. So here's the classic diagram that people will show you when they talk about what DevOps solves for. You have this silo that developers live in, and a silo for IT and operations folks. And what developers will end up doing, in theory, is writing this code. They're developing their software, and then because they live in a silo, they're throwing it over a wall and letting it land in IT's lap to handle. So the fear from IT's perspective is that they are going to end up with something that is actually garbage that is now their problem. And the classic meme here is like the child who's like grinning and smiling as a house burns down behind them. And like, your problem now. So it ends with this like vicious cycle of mutual resentment and distrust, which is what these frameworks for communication and making work more visible aims to solve for. And like I said, I'm really interested, because I am a pattern seeing person, to see if we could take some of these same strategies and use them in communicating with IT as data scientists. Unfortunately, we tend to have an even worse problem. Because the data scientists, we bring our code to IT, and what they hear from us is, hey, I created this code using a bunch of open source packages some random person from the internet created, and I built a web app out of it. Can you take this into production for me? Thanks. So not only are we asking them to do the same things with the same bad behavior as our developer counterpoints are, we're asking them to do it in using language frameworks that they are even less familiar working with. So I'm calling this our super vicious cycle of mutual resentment and distrust. And I'm making light of this, but it really does come down to the fact that even if we think that what we're hearing from IT is unfair and judgmental and not correct, it's important to take a step back and look at things from their perspective with a little bit of empathy, because we want to make sure that they know that we're not trying to make their lives terrible. We're just trying to do our work, and we need to take steps preemptively to help them understand that, so that we can start building that trust. So here are the challenges as our users. Organizationally, we're struggling to legitimize R itself. And then we're trying to work with these IT teams to get them on board, and they are resistant to that. On the other hand, technically, we also have challenges. We don't have the same software development background as our dev counterparts do. We lack that kind of education and exposure to the types of processes and tools that software developers have become accustomed to, so that they can communicate effectively with IT. And we're not sure how exactly those things map to what we're doing in data science. For the past year, I have been working closely with our Shiny team and our solutions engineering team to create content and resources for bringing Shiny into production. So the rest of the talk will be kind of Shiny and production focused, but these same concepts will also translate to just R in production, or are in general in organizations. So the Shiny team at our studio has produced a large number of packages for the support of bringing Shiny into production. And I want to talk through some of the shared goals that they translate to that map to DevOps principles. But first, before we get there, I want to talk about leveling up your own skill sets when it comes to developing Shiny applications. So I won't call anyone out because I actually strictly not supposed to, but I have seen many Shiny applications cross my computer screen that do not look super great. And I think that's the number one thing to look at when you are trying to build that trust and legitimacy within your organization is you want to produce something that looks professional, that is professional, and that you've tested and that you understand the performance ramifications of. So I like to think of hey, it's okay, I do this type of development all the time where I'm prototyping something, I'm iterating really fast, I'm creating a big mess. And I think of that as creating the hour-long talk of data products. If you've ever given a talk that's an hour long, that's a lot of space to fill. And it can be rambling and cluttered, and there are parts that really hit great, and there are parts that don't hit at all. And what your goal is when you're moving something to show other people, to put into production, is that you're looking to create the lightning talk of data products. So you want this 5-minute talk to be targeted and elegant and streamlined and optimized and performant. And that's the goal, but we don't give you a lot of information or structure about ways to iterate in order to get there until last RStudio conference. Joe Chang, the CTO of RStudio, gave a keynote at RStudio Conf called Shiny in Production, Principles, Practices, and Tools. And one of the best, coolest gems that came out of that talk that I just haven't seen people embrace or get excited about since then is this performance workflow that he outlined. So within the performance workflow, he talks about using 2 key packages that Shiny team developed in the last year called Shiny Load Test and ProfViz. Now, just so you know, Joe made a point in telling me when I was developing the Shiny in Production workshop that the thing he thinks is most important for our development and Shiny development is code profiling. If you're not profiling your code, you're doing something wrong in Joe's eyes. No, I won't put words in his mouth, but ProfViz, the tool for understanding what's making your code slow, is the most important thing. He thinks trusting your instincts here are what really gets folks in trouble. So you're using Shiny Load Test to determine if your application is fast enough for production. And then if it's not, you're using ProfViz to profile your code and understand how to make it get there. And in order to make it get there, you're going through this optimization workflow. So he has different steps here. I won't go into them. This talk is available on the RStudio resources webinars page, and always will be. So please, if there's one piece of homework or takeaway from my talk, it's to go watch Joe's talk because it's amazing. Once you've done this, you have this piece of code or a Shiny application that you do feel proud of, that you do think is performant. What's next? So this is where we can kind of start digging into the DevOps goals here. And one of the goals of DevOps is to reduce the risk of deploying a breaking change when you're putting code into production. So one of the ways that you can do this is to start writing tests. And we have a package called Shiny Test that will help you do this. So you've developed this nice application. You want to make sure that it continues to work into the future. And there are a number of things that you can do that will break the application. So developing these tests and a testing framework that you feel good about using around the app can help you talk to IT and say, yeah, we have a plan for carrying this application and making changes and supporting it once we get it into this deployed state. But there's another piece to this, automation. I don't want to remember to run this testing procedure every time. I definitely don't want to have to hand that job off to IT, and I don't want to need to communicate with them every time to make sure that they're okay with me having made the change and they know that I've run the test. It's a big communication nightmare. So another one of these DevOps goals is, in general, just the improvement of daily work. This quote from Mike Orzen really captures this, and he says, like, even more important than daily work is the improvement of daily work. You want to make sure that your IT folks know that you're not trying to make their jobs harder. And the way that you can do that with testing is to automate it. So here's where we do get a little bit into the nitty-gritty of these tools. And there are lots of different tools that you can use to automate tests in R. Two of the frameworks that we have just available as examples with the Shiny test vignettes are using Git and GitHub and Travis to automate testing. So you can go into the Shiny test vignettes, pull that code off, make minimal changes, and be up and running with automated testing very quickly. Here's my most important thing about putting Shiny applications into production. If Joe's is ProfViz, mine is getting yourself a Sandbox. I think that maybe Joe takes this for granted that this already exists, but in my experience working with our customers, a lot of them do not have a place where they can simply test things, push them into a similar production environment, and do things like user acceptance testing even before they get to the point of wanting to deploy things with an IT group. So the shared goal here from DevOps is to shorten the distance between development and production by having this environment where you can sort of iterate and test your deployments and make sure things work in like a twin environment to what your production environment looks like. The example I have here up is for our Studio Connect publishing platform, but you can do this with Shiny Server open source, Shiny Server Pro, or your Docker craziness that you've put together. All of these things are really good and map across different tools. You don't have to fall into step with what our resources say. They work across many different tooling sets. Finally, you can get really deep into DevOps and pull out some nifty and cool techniques that also map to Shiny development. And this is one that I played with in 2 talks at USAR this year, where I spoke about the importance of when you're taking applications to production to decouple the idea of a deployment from a release. So a deployment is anytime you push code into this environment, and that could be your testing environment or your production environment. But a release is when that code or those features are made available to the users. So there are different patterns you can follow to kind of hide a deployment from your users until you're ready to release it to them. And one of those is application-based release patterns. So for that, I explored using feature toggles within Shiny applications to control some of that. And the other is environmental-based release patterns. And I'll cut to the chase. Environment release patterns are way easier to manage in my experience for using Shiny applications, but both of these talks are available as recordings if you're interested in really digging into that. And there are many other things that you can pull from DevOps that translate and will help you communicate. This DevOps Handbook has been really useful to me in coming up with ideas and creative ways to talk about DevOps and to practice putting things in different contexts for people. So I highly recommend checking that out. And I want to end by saying that empathetic communication is very challenging. There are a lot of accounts that we work with and folks who we try to help that are in really tough, really hard situations and struggling to make any progress at all with legitimization or bringing their apps into production or creating these environments that are conducive to helping their data scientists get the analytic infrastructure that they need. So from DevOps, we say make work visible, define these shared goals, build a checklist, and above all, be prepared to iterate because this is a journey and you're not going to get the perfect solution on your first try. These things take time to develop and you should be prepared to have a little heartache. And as long as you keep a little bit of empathy along the way, hopefully you should have a good time. This slide is what we collected at our first Shiny in Production training about what folks' ideas about what production is. And I liked this one that came out in the middle the most of all. Someone just responded to what is production with a single word, credibility. And that means a lot to me. I think that really captures what my goal is in going out into the community and speaking with folks. I'm trying to help us all as a community develop that credibility so that we can work with other folks inside of our organizations. You can judge whether I've done a good job of that. Here are my last 10 talks from the year about Shiny in Production and doing DevOps as a data scientist. They're all available on SpeakerDeck. And like Jared mentioned, I'm really trying to get that RadMins hashtag going. I'm part of a big team at our studio that does solutions engineering. And we all write content that lives at solutions.ourstudio.com. And if you're looking to get in touch with us, community.ourstudio.com and the RadMins channel there is a great way to do that. So thank you.